Welcome back to Dunks and Donuts. I am Ryan.
I am Jared.
And hey, hi, what's up? How you doing?
I'm good. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm so excited for this episode. You want to tell the people what's happening?
I will tell the people what's happening. So this is just like the most incredible episode I think we've had to date. You guys will be hearing from him in a minute, but Ryan and I got to sit down with the legendary Grande of Celtics Sports Radio, and he does the play-by-play on 98.5 whenever the Celtics play. And I mean, man, this dude's resume of stuff he's done is absurd, and we go over all that in the interview. But it was awesome. He was awesome.
He was amazing. I had gone into it not really expecting anything at all. I didn't really know. All I really know is like the vague understanding of how sports media is, especially radio, which a lot of it I know people don't usually like. And I think that's probably just like morning after coverage and stuff like that. But I had no idea. And talking to him, and first of all, he's so smart. And so knowledgeable about what he's talking about, but he also has such a great perspective on how to positively look at this season, but just basketball in general. And he was kind of just like right on track with our whole direction of trying to bring more attention to like the really good parts of the Celtics community. So he's just like a really positive person. He was great to talk to. He spent more than enough time with us. He didn't have to spend like an hour on a weeknight or whatever after a basketball game talking to us, but he did. He was great. It was an honor. It was kind of crazy. I'm still reeling.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, you took the words right out of my mouth. It was an absolute honor to sit down with Mr. Grande. So without further ado, guys, here is the interview. Hey guys, welcome back to another very special episode of Dunks and Donuts. As you guys can see, Ryan and I are joined by a very special guest. Welcome to Dunks and Donuts, the legendary Mr. Grande. How are you today?
I'm doing great, guys. So legend is a bit. I mean, I'm not telling you to stop, but you have to say it's my job to say, "Oh no, don't say that."
Couldn't be me.
No, I don't think legend is enough, to be honest. I mean, you've had till this point an exceptional career, starting all the way back in what was it, 91 with WEEI, and then you've made your way all over the place to the WNBA. You've done hockey. Ryan will be excited about this. You've done MMA with Bellator. So just kind of, we'll start there. Just kind of walk us through what the journey's been like so far.
It's always dangerous when you ask that question. When I was a kid, there was one of the classic TV shows was All in the Family, right? One of the all-time great shows. And there's an episode in which Edith goes back to her high school reunion and sees someone she hasn't seen in 25 years. And the guy says, "Hey, what have you been up to?" And she goes, "Well, the weekend after graduation, we went up to the country. And that morning we had..." I'm like, no, you can't compress 30 years. Although, again, I do feel when I talk about it, it's a little George Costanza. Like, if you compress everything I've done into one day, like 5 minutes, it sounds pretty good. Like, if you list all the stuff. But
great on paper in 5 minutes. Yeah,
exactly. Everything sounds great. Yeah. Oh, I did this, and I did this, and I did. Wow, that's a lot of stuff. Yeah, but it's been, as you said, it's been
back to back.
30 years. Because I was still in school when I was at EEI. I'm reliving some of this stuff only because, as you two know, as probably everybody watching knows, there's going to be a Celtics documentary that they're in the process of making right now, and it's going to be 9 or 10 parts. It's going to be the super long documentary, and they just got to my part. I just did my interview a few days ago, which is like 2 hours of recapping everything. And one of the days I talk about is I was barely out of school the day Reggie Lewis died, when I was at EEI, and that's 1993. So you realize it's been a pretty long time, but yeah, it's 20 something years in the NBA, and it's thousands of games with the majority of them with Cedric Maxwell at my side. And, it's fun. This time of year, you see when the tournaments are going on, when the hockey tournaments going on, you sort of reminisce about hockey. You always reminisce about the stuff you're not doing. When all my friends go on to do, Bellator just merged with PFL. So that's become a different thing now. You're kind of watching all the fighters whose fights you called, and they kind of go on. And so it's a remarkable life. A buddy of mine, Kenny Albert, and I talk about this a lot, that when you can sort of do everything, you never really know what the next thing you're going to get to do is. And that's always been the exciting thing for me. If I were to do that one George Costanza sentence about the 30 years and compress it into one sentence, it's the ability to do anything that I think has given me the opportunity to see the world and see some amazing events and sit courtside at Game 7 of the NBA Finals and call world title fights in, Tokyo. So, I've been pretty lucky.
Yeah, and
it's a killer 1 minute, explanation.
Yeah, no, that was a great, you got that perfectly condensed, I think. And the George Costanza reference, one of my favorites. He's one of my favorite sitcom characters ever.
It's not a lie if you believe it.
Yeah, exactly. And to hit on your point with thousands of NBA games, I mean, you were just the third person in NBA history to call 1,000 games, and then you hit 2,000 games in the bubble, August 1st or 21st of 2020. So you just the track record has been incredible. And I guess from there, I want to ask, you and I were talking before you hopped on about Jalen Brunson potentially breaking the Knicks record. So it came to mind just with everything you've done, Celtics, NBA, WNBA, whatever it might be. Is there a favorite moment of something that you called that is just the go-to for you?
There isn't one. You hope it's still to come, right? I mean, as we're sitting here talking, it's the end of March in 2024, and I have a strong hunch that one of the most memorable moments of my career and games I've gotten to call and moments I've gotten to call could very easily be a couple of months away, right?
That's so awesome.
You don't actually not. I think the idea of documenting history, and I'm sure we'll talk about this season and the very vocal minority of fans who are just not enjoying it because they're so afraid and paranoid about what's to come, that they're not understanding that every team that won a championship went through things like this. And if you can't enjoy the moments as they happen, as you said, we're literally talking now. Whenever you're watching this, go back to March 29th of 2024 and look up what Jalen Brunson did that night in San Antonio when then 20-year-old rookie Victor Wembanyama, who probably one day when you're watching this back and he's been a 6-time MVP, you're going to remember he was a rookie at one point. He had 40 and 20 in this game. And it was just one of those nights. I say this a lot. We're talking 48 hours after what we thought was the game of the year, which the Knicks and Spurs just blew out of the water with the Celtics and Hawks, that you just never know when you come to the ballpark. And obviously when you walk into a Game 7, there are going to be moments that you're going to be remembering forever. But Game 13 of the year, I love some innocuous game or some innocuous fight you show up to, or a hockey game at midseason, because there's a seed of history in every game, right? And sometimes it blossoms into a night you remember forever. And this was the night when Brunson was scoring all those points against the Spurs. It made me wonder how many people have scored 60 against the Spurs, not remembering. It took me a split second to remember, hey, you called one, when Jason Tatum did it in the comeback, in the 32-point comeback win against the Spurs. So, again, you do enough things, you never really know. And you have to just enjoy every night in show business. I think it goes back to the playoffs are going to be what they're going to be. The moments are going to be what they're going to be, but enjoy what's happening right now. That's the long answer. The short answer is I tend to, maybe because it's fresh in my mind because of the documentary, I always tend to look back on the Pierce-LeBron Game 7 in 2008, because as it was happening, I recognized it was Bird Dominique for another generation, and that it was a day unfolding in real time. I remember thinking as it was happening, they're going to, I don't know what Zoom is because it hasn't been invented yet. And there's a new thing going on called podcasts, which may or may not catch on. But one day I have a hunch somewhere I'll be talking about what's happening right now on this Sunday afternoon.
It's magical.
As it was, again, this is just fresh in my mind because you're going to hear me say this in the documentary. I don't know what conjured me to say it as it happened, but the end of that game was Eddie House, who I just was on the flight to San Antonio with today. Eddie House jumping in the passing lane and picking off, I think it was Joe Smith for the Cavs, the former number 1 pick who was playing with LeBron on that team, who threw the ball away. Eddie House stole it, and that's how that game ended. And for whatever reason in my mind, I said, because there's another famous steal that ended a playoff series for the Celtics many years ago that my predecessor called. And in the moment that he stole it, something in my brain said, this game and series and this epic instant classic game just ended on a steal. And I said, Eddie House steals the ball. I was answering Havlicek. It was Havlicek stole the ball. And this one, just in my cadence, was Eddie House steals the ball. As if just another Sunday afternoon game 7, right? Celtics history ended with the steal just off Causeway Street in this sort of epic game. So I think the beauty, the romanticism of being one team's announcer is connecting the history of that franchise. And before you know it, you wake up and we're all older than we think we are. And suddenly you've been the voice of the Celtics for 23 years and stuff has happened in those 23 years that
a whole bunch.
And some stuff's about to happen that we're going to remember too.
Which is just so cool to think that you can still look forward to it in that exact same way. You know what I mean? Where still now you can say that there's a possibility that your best moment has yet to happen. I just, even still like years and years after the fact, to still feel that way is so special.
Well, I think you have to, because if you're not doing that, you're not opening yourself up to the next moment. And maybe it's because when I got here to Boston, when I came back to Boston from Minnesota, it was, I used to watch the Celtics a lot in those Larry Bird years. And those guys would come back, and Bird would come back, and McHale would come back, and people would romanticize about those guys. And I've lived long enough now to see when Paul Pierce comes back, and Perk comes back, and Eddie House comes back, they are now the legends from the previous generation. And that's the upside of it and the beauty. The downside of it is suddenly those guys could do no wrong. Those guys who went to Game 7 in the first round against a 36-win Atlanta team, who got outscored by Cleveland in the second round, and who, were 31-10 on the road that year, and then lost their first 6 road games in the playoffs. But everything is perfect. There are no Larry Bird missed layups on YouTube. Yeah, right? Those don't exist. His bad games don't exist. Everything is crystallized. And I've said this many times, but one day there's going to be a whole lot of people complaining about the playoff game Deuce Tatum just had, saying, "Oh man, your dad, he was brilliant every time. But Jason never made a mistake. Why can't Deuce be more like his dad?" Yes, that one day will happen too, right? It's all part of the full circle, and it's worse now with social media. It's worse because of there was no Twitter or X or Twix or whatever we're calling it in 2008 for people to complain about when the Celtics went to Game 7. Yep. But you get the point. And if there's one message I have throughout all of this, it's that if you don't enjoy a team that's going to win 60-plus games and has the 5th best scoring differential in NBA history, and you're approaching the playoffs with fear as opposed to swagger, I don't quite get that.
Yeah, and that's, I think you said it beautifully. And what you used, full circle, I think is just the perfect descriptor. Not even just talking with, like you said, in the future with Deuce Tatum, being compared to Jason, but even going back to the John Havlicek and Larry Bird games and the Eddie House, Paul Pierce games. And it's just perfectly full circle. And it even extends past that to this podcast. I mean, the last handful of episodes we've done, we've had people, and we've even said it ourselves on other shows, enjoy the ride. This is a historic team that we're never going to see something like this.
Just going to jump up and walk in front of.
Yeah, that is.
wandering back and forth.
Yeah.
But
That's like her whole thing.
I can
between the two of
ignore
us, we
them
have
for the
6
most
cats.
part. There's 2 of them asleep next to me, and then I can't stop. So just let him live his life.
Yes, but actually,
this 69 Mets were chasing the Cubs in the pennant race, and a black cat got onto the field at Shea Stadium and ran in front of the Cubs dugout, and that was supposedly, the bad luck that was going to curse the Cubs.
Luckily, he has a very small white patch, so we can count him out. We're all set. Don't worry.
Yeah,
I've vetted this situation.
I think we are lucky. But one thing I do want to learn more about, and I mean, I know you've talked about it probably pretty extensively in the past, but your relationship with Cedric Maxwell. I mean, you guys, if someone made a buddy cops like show with you and Max, that'd probably be my new favorite show. Anytime I hear him talk about you, he has the biggest smile on his face. I have one that comes to mind last year on View from the Rafters. He was talking about how you're always making calls that are like these electric sort of things, and it can be about the other team. And it was something about like how he's like, it was LeBron James, and you have like this electric LeBron James drives and dunks it or whatever. And that video just puts a smile on my face.
So I'm more fascinated about Sean Grande, the broadcaster, when we lose. Sean Grande maintains energy throughout a call. It could be the call for the other team is like, and he'll say something like, and LeBron James, oh my God, what a play. And he finished it going towards the rim. And it's a winning play. I'm on the other side going, oh man, LeBron James. Yeah, and then I admire him for that. He keeps a certain amount of energy, which I think is great.
And I just want to know, like, from the very beginning, or not the beginning, but just like how your relationship with Cedric has just formed into what it is today.
Well, he's the reason that I came in the first place. I was 20-something years old. I've got a TV job in the NBA, and I'm with Timberwolves and Kevin Garnett, and I hadn't really thought of coming back to Boston. And it was Cedric Maxwell that called my house, and that was the first time I really gave it some serious thought about what we could be. That with any great team, I think you'd agree that it's the sum of the parts, right? That the joint collaboration is better than the sum of the parts. And I thought this could really be something the way we fit together with the slightly different ages and the different approaches. And, he was African-American guy from North Carolina who liked to listen to James Taylor. And I was a white kid from New York that liked to listen to Jay-Z. And there were, these kind of fun cultural clashes and age clashes and pop culture clashes that were going to sustain us through 25 win seasons and through long nights and through 30-point games. And it becomes a show. And although I don't think it'd be tough to get either one of us to say it out loud, I think you guys would know every great show, studio show, part, whatever it is, at the heart, no matter how much battling there may be, that you've got people that love each other, right? Mm-hmm. Think about inside the NBA. That's just a family, and they're going to fight like brothers, right, all the time. But deep down the connection between them, and I think we've been unbelievably lucky that way. And I knew the first preseason, I remember doing a game in Cleveland, the 4th or 5th game of the preseason, and I was like, this is going to be something. And we didn't know where it was going to take us. Are we going to go to TV? Are we going to stay on? We had no idea where any of it was going to go in the years to come. But I knew that this is right. This fits. And luckily, it's been, as it turns out, it's the longest relationship either one of us has ever had.
Isn't that beautiful?
We survived marriages, kids, the whole. Yeah, but here we are. We're still going, in year 23.
We're still going strong.
Mm-hmm.
No, and it's like Ryan said, she said it. It's beautiful. Like, it's a beautiful relationship that you guys have, and it's inspiring to see a connection like that, especially for someone like me who's been trying to get into media and creating something and creating a name for myself. And like, having that sort of connection is just, it's inspirational, to be completely honest, is what it is. So the next thing that comes to mind for me is, I know you've experience doing games obviously on the radio, on TV. What's like the biggest difference with that?
The answer to that, without getting, I can get a little 500 level class wonky and talking about play-by-play. It's a rabbit hole you don't necessarily want to go down, because I'll drag you down there and keep you down there for a long lecture. But it really depends on, the short answer is it depends on the sport. And that's where, to me, the skill of what I do, the greats at what I do, are the ones that can do multiple sports in multiple capacities, can do TV or radio in any sport. That was when the MMA thing happened. I knew nothing about MMA, and not because I didn't necessarily like it or have respect for it. So there's only so many hours in the day. The night we're talking here on this particular Friday night, there's not only a full NBA slate. We just talked about the Jalen Brunson game. There's the NCAA basketball tournament, the NCAA hockey tournament, which I did for many, many years. There's a million things. You can't. It's the second day of the baseball season. So that it's impossible to. I've got you got screens going, and you've got all these different things. It's impossible to keep track of everything. So to me, the art is being able to do all the different things and all the different ways there are to do them. So hockey to me is the one that where radio and TV are the most similar. Baseball is where they're the most different, where you can see everything. I think basketball too. Basketball is a big difference. And I've said many times in different venues that last year was my favorite year in the NBA, because I was doing both TV and radio, and the art, the beauty of it was doing a game on TV with Scal on a Tuesday night, and then on Wednesday night doing a game on radio with Max. Trust me when I tell you, those are two completely different jobs. Completely different jobs, and they're both great, but they're completely different conditions, right? So that was, to me, it was after 23 years and 26 in the league, you can get a little bit monotonous when you've done the same thing thousands of times over again. So that to me was the beauty of the last couple of years, was being able to do both. With MMA, that was TV. With hockey, I've done both. With baseball now, I've done both. So they're all very different, and every sport lends itself. Every sport, every combat thing, everything is different on TV and radio, and what you are going to choose to describe and share with your audience. And going back to Max's job is tougher. Being the analyst on radio is tougher than it is on TV, because your window is very small to get your point in, and that's where it becomes, it's very musical. All play-by-play to me is musical, but when you find that perfect partner to play jazz with, like Max, we just develop a cadence and a rhythm, and we know where the beats are.
Yeah, and I think that's a great description, honestly. And I'll admit, there's been plenty of times where I don't miss games, right? I've listened or watched every game, and there's been times where I've just been home and I've just decided to go for a drive and listen to you and Max call games, because it is so much different. And I just feel like some of the calls feel more almost electric, more, I don't want to say more authentic, but it's like a different feeling.
It's more illustrative. It has to be more descriptive, of course, because they can't see if you're listening. So it's interesting, because not only does it have to sound good, it has to sound good between two different people. But then it also has to describe exactly what's going on right when it's going on. So it is so much different than knowing that everyone else is also seeing exactly what you're seeing.
You don't have to go drive, right? You can match up the audio. I don't know how to do it. It's called,
loves a challenge.
It's right, but there are ways. I don't want anybody using up gas money driving around for no reason. I've got, we have this job for many years. People would come up to me, and they were almost apologizing for listening. There was always an excuse, oh, I got stuck in traffic, so I had to listen to you. The cable went out. I had to listen to you. I'm like, we do this every night. You don't have to make an excuse as to why. You felt like you had to listen.
This is why I was in my car, okay?
Yeah. Now listen, we obviously appreciate it. I usually say it at the end of every year. I probably don't say it enough. People have to make an effort to enjoy the games with us, whether it's doing the work to match up the audio and the video, which is much different than it used to be. In the old days with Johnny, it's just matched up. Now people get the games delivered to them on their phone, on their tablet, on their TV, in so many different ways at completely different times, that it becomes a little bit of a chore to to match it up. That's one of the really cool things Major League Baseball has done on MLB TV. You can match. It does it for you. Like you pick the game you want to watch, and then you pick the audio you want, and it will match up, automatically. Wow. I assume we're getting to that in the NBA. I know it's already being discussed, but that's sort of the there's an extra effort that goes into it. We know it, and we appreciate it.
No, that's funny you say that, because the other day I was legit thinking about that, like matching up the audio. But for me, driving is very cathartic, and it helps like anxiety, and I enjoy driving, and it, like, you guys give me an excuse to go drive. Like, I want an excuse to listen to you. You know what I mean? It's like the other side of the same coin. And it's just been great. But to build off what you were just saying with, other people who give you an excuse, like, oh, the cable went out, I had to go listen to it in the car or whatever. Obviously you've been with the Celtics for, I think it's, if my math is correct, about 23 years now. So, and with us here on Dunks and Donuts, we're very community centric. We focus on like the community service events the players do, the fans, everything else. So what's your interactions been as a whole, like from the beginning to now with the community? Like, did it start off just great and grow from there? Or did you ever have like a feeling of like backlash? Like, what has that been like for you?
I don't think so. I think, when I came back here, and I'd done the 3 years of TV in Minnesota, but I had been on the air in Boston for, before I was out of school. Like, for the 5-6 years, if you mentioned EEI, I had been there, and I was doing stuff on the air, and I did a ton of college hockey. And I was at BU for a lot of years doing games, and I was at BC doing football and hockey at BC for the couple of years before I went in the league. So when I came back, it wasn't like going to a new. But when I went to Minnesota, that was starting from scratch. That was a brand new market, and I was crazy young, and I was, doing TV in the NBA in a brand new market where I didn't know anybody, and I was, starting from scratch. So that to me was a little bit more intimidating, especially because it was a big job at the time. Than coming back here. Coming back to Boston was more like home, and I'm glad you guys do the community stuff, because we try to spotlight it. We probably don't do it enough, but that, you're never prouder to work for the Celtics than when the Shamrock Foundation is doing one of their events and, trying to make the world and this community a better place.
Yeah. And that's really where Ryan and I start. Like, that's what kind of sparked it for us. We had a couple of people at the very beginning when we first started say like, hey, you should focus on this. And that's where it kind of shifted. And after just doing some preliminary research, the Shamrock Foundation, everything that the players do on their own accord, that's not even through the team directly, is just incredible. And, so that's kind of been like our biggest thing, is like focusing on that.
Yeah, there's a lot of like coverage of those events, but you're not doing us great here, right? But there's a lot of coverage of those events, but I feel like there isn't as much coverage of the coverage, you know what I mean, in one place. And it's also, it just kind of, when I realized that the Shamrock Foundation, specifically because I do think they do so much hands-on work, especially just even with the curbside caravan. We were just talking about that recently, but going out and being so in direct contact with just people in the community that may or may not watch the Celtics, you know what I mean? That are just people that could use a hand, completely non-basketball related. And especially, I think we said this recently, but I'm not sure if it's this way with every team. I'm sure it is to a certain extent, but the well is sort of endless with these different events every week. There's one or two, either players are assigned or they just do it, out of, I guess, the kindness of their own heart. But yeah, there are just a lot of different opportunities to talk about how great the effect that the Celtics have on the community in Boston and outside of it, because I'm in Rhode Island. So they stretch all the way out here.
Well, it's, what are we doing here, right? Like, if not, we're providing, 2.5, 3 hours of distraction from people's days who might have had a really difficult. That's just to begin. That's just the product that we're delivering, is trying to, give people something to attach to and people to enjoy. And if you see some of these kids' faces when they see a player and they get to interact with a player, and a player walks into, this, like, their high school gym or building a court or something like that. Those are the reminders. One of the most memorable days I've had with the Celtics is we went to Walter Reed Hospital in DC. And it's one of those things where they say, you're going there to make other people feel good. And there's never a day, whether it's doing one of the charities with kids, a visit to Walter Reed, there's never a day when you don't leave feeling better. Like, they make you feel better because you were able to make somebody happy and put a smile on their face that maybe wasn't there before. So at the end of all of these days, it's a big part of the show. And what we do is to, from the games and the broadcasts to the charity work outside, it's all under the same umbrella, which is that we are here to make people's lives better, even if it's for a short period of time.
So true.
And that's just incredibly beautifully said. So bravo for that. That was,
I can't sing or dance, guys. This is what this is kind of what I do.
This is kind of his claim to fame, I guess. Could say.
Right, like, you might be known for this somewhere, but no, that's one of my favorite things about this team is, like you said,
to my son, I'm just the guy that takes him to school and makes his lunch.
Right.
It's a normal guy, yeah.
No, yeah, it's just a normal guy to some, and to others, you're the voice of the Celtics, and to others, it's, you're just a stranger in the store, right? So, like, it's just a weird world we live in, because Ryan and I, we've only been doing this for a little over a month, and we went to an event recently, and we had people, like, coming up to us like, can we get pictures? Like, oh my God, like, you guys are these guys on Twitter, and we're like, yeah, that's us. It's weird, but
it's just like the Celtics community itself is so dedicated already on their own, in any direction, whether it's towards the sport or just other people that like it. And it's so welcoming. You don't really have to have anything else in common. And yeah, that's the Dunks and Donuts story, I guess, is that kind of everyone was so willing to just talk to us if they really love the Celtics. And that's all. That was just that simple, and has allowed us to, like, hear from just, I guess, some really influential people to us individually, that I guess are just really big landmarks in the last 23 years, I guess, but definitely like the last 10 years for me of impact on how I see basketball in general.
That's an interesting way to put it, only because that's something I have to remember, that 23 years to older, longtime Celtic fans is just a portion of their memory. But there's also, if you're 16 years old, and I'm talking about the comeback in 2002 against the Nets in the conference finals, there are people that don't know what that means. So it's always important to remember. It's, again, why they call it, it's called broadcasting, not narrowcasting, because that's one of the challenges. So many broadcast entities and different shows, whatever, are aimed at a very specific target demographic. Whereas we have people taking in Celtic games who could be 8 or 98. And that's a pretty big, wide demographic. So you constantly have to be resetting things and doing things in different venues. Take what we're doing right now, because we grew up in a world where there was linear television and some people listen to the games on radio. But listen, my son's 12 and you can't get him on, well, I do because it's my job, but you can't get him off YouTube, right? You have to find the ways to, you can't just do what you've always done. And my industry is going through revolution right now.
Yeah.
With cord cutting and how people are taking in the product. It's changing faster than we can react to it. So to me, the most important thing is to find your audience wherever they happen to be in a way that's going to make them comfortable. And you have to be able to call the games, but you also have to be able to speak in terms of there's talk shows and there's podcasts and there's YouTube videos and there's short little videos. I've been on them for quite a while to do short YouTube and, TikTok length videos. We did a video where they put a camera on Max and I, and then us calling a highlight in the game and put the highlight of the game, in the bottom half of it. And it was huge. And I was kind of making the point that this is how people, you can't just deliver it to them the way you want to deliver it to them. Now we are, all of you are our customers at our restaurant. We have to serve it to you the way you want it served. And that is constantly changing.
Yeah, and it evolves. It's evolved so much over time. It's funny you say that because, like, you would find that putting the game in the smaller part of the screen and doing whatever you have to do with the video overlay for a minute now in 2024 could have so many eyes on it that didn't even exist 5 years ago. It wasn't even really an option to do it exactly like that. But yeah, to evolve and be able to evolve, especially radio wise, because so much has changed when it comes to listening. And I guess just how less frequently people do listen to the radio to listen to music as much. So really sports radio is, at least for me, one of the only reasons I really listen to radio now, So I think it must have been challenging, but if you were willing to go with the flow of it all, a really interesting ride through people listening to the radio all the time to having to find different ways of getting it into their home and stuff like that.
Yeah, we're live. That's the one thing we have. We're live. If you want to hear the game as it's going on, you got to hear it. If I want to hear the new Dua Lipa, I'm going to find it anywhere I choose to find it. If the new podcast is out, I'm not going to go, I better get on Spotify at 11 a.m. on Friday when this thing drops. No, I'm going to listen to it when I want to listen to it. But the one thing we have, which is why sports rights continue to escalate at a time that so many things have come backwards, is because of the live element of it. I still think we should be finding different ways to deliver it, but that's the one thing that we will always have. Listen, I'm okay until they figure out how to get AI to call a game live and react to it. I'm okay. Once that happens, then obviously I'll be done like everybody else. But
yeah, we'll all be on our way out at that point, I think. So.
I can't stand the thought of AI taking over everything, and it already kind of is, and it's so upsetting to me. But I will say that I don't think any AI could hold a candle to what you and Max do. So I like, if I had a vote, you would be safe, but that's just one person.
You could make an entire Grande and Max broadcast on AI, but you can't have it react. They haven't figured out yet how to make it react live to what's happening. It's probably, it's coming within my lifetime, but hopefully I'll set my son to come.
I do want to go back to one thing you were just saying, where when you're doing the calls and these broadcasts, you compared it to like a restaurant, and the listeners are your customers, and you have to kind of serve it to them the way they want. What's, I guess, a way that you've over the years learned to kind of do it in a way that satisfies the majority? Because I don't think there's ever going to be a way to 100% satisfy everybody.
No, you can't. There's only so many ways to, again, there are different styles. You can serve it in a different way. The problem is the game is going on. I think the biggest change for me, the evolution of it, and maybe it's because I have a job at a brain that allows me to multitask, which is probably a younger brain than I am chronologically, is social media and doing the things simultaneously. If you follow me on social media, you'll see these things appear in the middle of games that look like TV graphics. And that's because I have a very limited amount of skill with word processing and all the other, but I can do it enough to where I can create a graphic, snip it, tweet it while the game is going on, because just as you said, there's other things going on the screen while the game is going on. I recognize very early on that the days of people sitting around staring at the TV and doing nothing else are gone. The days of sitting around listening to the radio and moving your little Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown figures around, as I call, oh, he's on the left side now. Let me move my little, that doesn't exist anymore. People are doing a million different things. So I recognized also that my social media following in the early days of it was escalating quickly enough that I realized I was reaching more people, especially when Tweet starts pinballing around out there.
Yes.
I'm reaching more people that way. So it essentially, I began to use it as a supplement for the broadcast, because one of the things I love the most are, TV graphics. So if I'm doing radio instead of TV, I don't have graphics. I can't sit here and run you the whole list of the 40-point games that a Celtic has had in the last 10 years, but I have that ready. So when Jaylen scores his 41st point, I can tweet that out. And then if you have the game on and, you're on the radio in your house and you're online and you're doing other things and you're on social media, you can see the thing that I'm talking about, and it just supplements. David Stern was the first one on this. The idea isn't to be in one place and limit your product. The idea is to be everywhere and make it easy for people to take in the product. I recognize people aren't going to listen. It's rare that people are going to be listening for all 3 hours of our broadcast. You're going to be checking in and out, and you're going to be checking in and out on social media. So be in as many different places as you can be.
And that brings up a good point about the social media stuff. Now, obviously, leading up into us recording this, you and I have talked, and you were telling me that play-by-play guys are night owls, right? There's not a real morning for you guys, which I do want to cover in a second. But for what?
Until you have a kid, and then all of a sudden everyone exists.
And there's no sleeping.
Nope.
Yeah, no sleeping.
People say, you look tired. You look like you haven't slept. I'm like, it's been about 12 and a half years.
It's like, it's been a minute.
Fair. At least you haven't hit the 15 marker yet of no sleep. But I think considering you haven't slept in 12 and a half years, everything you're doing is just that much more impressive. So, but going to the social media stuff, something that you and I have interacted on social media before outside of just planning this is you post a lot of, I don't want to call them necessarily obscure stats, but after games, you always post something of like a benchmark that the Celtics have hit that might not be as common knowledge. Now, I know you mentioned usually during the game, you'll have like list of 40-point games if JB is going off or whatever, but is that all stuff you have prepared, or is that more of a way to just say like at the end of games, like walk us kind of through that, just the whole process of like where those tweets are coming from and like what the goal is with those, I guess.
Short version is at the end of every game, I've got another hour or two of work, and it's updating the file of the game that's just happened, updating, the top. These are the guys that scored 25 or more points. And these guys got 10 or more rebounds, and this was the biggest lead, and this was whatever. And it doesn't sound like much, but then you do it every week, and then you do it every month, and then you do it for every game, every season, and pretty soon you've got whatever. I think I've done 2,200 Celtic games, something like that. And eventually you have a file, and a lot of the things you'll see me share are since 2001. Which is when I started with the Celtics, because some of this stuff doesn't exist on Basketball Reference, and it doesn't, they didn't always keep track of. They didn't always keep track of leads or keep track of the things that interest me. And pretty soon you've got a pretty good body of work. So it's a preparation for the next game begins, and then sort of updating that file, which is the basic. That's sort of what I use when something is going on. It's a combination of that and institutional memory, because either fortunately or unfortunately, my brain works in a way where when something happens, I go, oh, you know what? That happened in Phoenix in 2005. I don't know where my car keys are, but
exactly.
I can like, oh yeah, wait a minute. That was Ricky Davis did that thing in 2005, and this thing happened, and Ricky Davis missed this shot late in the game, and the Celtics won that game, and they ended up winning the season series with Cleveland. And that's why when they were tied with Cleveland at the end of the 03-04 season, the Celtics got the 8th spot. Cleveland missed the playoffs. The Celtics were not in the draft lottery. They picked lower, so Robert Swift was off the board, and Danny took Al Jefferson instead. So 3 years later, Danny had Al Jefferson to trade to Minnesota instead of Robert Swift, and that's why the new Big Three era happened, because of that one Ricky Davis game in November of 2003. That is both a sickness, but once in a while it comes in handy.
Exactly. It's a skill and a curse, that's for sure.
I wouldn't call it a curse. I think that's super fascinating, and I will admit, just
everything you have to remember everything.
Institutional
But no,
memory matters. We have. You've heard the name Jeff Twiss, PR legend who's been with the franchise forever, and you realize this again only came up recently because of doing the documentary. I'm the last Celtics announcer who will get the stamp of approval from Red Auerbach. Right? Like eventually all this stuff goes away. Institutional memory goes away. Like Jeff has been there since I think around 1980. So between the two of us, he certainly got 1980 to 2000. And between 2001 and 2024, I've seen every game, recalled pretty much every game, in that span. So that stuff I think matters. I think it's particularly for franchises like the Celtics, like the Yankees, like the Canadians, like the Bruins, like the Rangers. These are, long time historic heritage franchises. It's important to have people like that.
I couldn't agree more. I definitely think, and this also goes back to what we talked about of comparing people in the future. When we were talking at the beginning about the Eddie House steal, right? Like it's only a finite number of people who are going to remember these types of things unless they go out of their way to find it. And so to your point, like, I absolutely agree. Like, it is important to have people like you and people like Jeff to kind of keep that memory going, So I definitely have to agree.
Yeah, it's certain things that you can't go and ask Stat Muse about. You know what I mean? Like, speaking of AI, but you can't go and look those things up. And there are so frequently tweet-specific just statistics or memories that serve sort of as a parallel. And I think I can't imagine, I wouldn't even know how to identify that, without it just being something that I guess is an institutionalized memory, which is really interesting.
It's two dimensions. I'm sorry, right? It's 2 dimensions versus 3 dimensions. That's what it is. Daniel Gafford had that game a couple of weeks ago where he had all the dunks. And he was one shy of the NBA record, which Shaq had. I think Shaq had 11 dunks in the game 3 or 4 times. And one of those games was against the Celtics. And it was in March of 2003. And he had 48 points and 20 rebounds. And I know that because he was 10 feet from me, courtside, yelling at Jimmy O'Brien, saying, "You can't front me. Why are you trying to front me?" as the ball was going into him, and he was doing whatever he wanted to do. And that was the day after the U.S. began ground operations in Iraq, the famous shock and awe. We call that the Shaq and awe game that happened in 2003. And these are just the stories. People aren't going to, years from now, it's going to be, oh, Shaq had 48 points and 20 rebounds against the Celtics in March of 2003. But in a 3-dimensional memory, it was the night Shaq was screaming because Walter McCarty was trying to front him. And he was, as that was going on, he was so not concerned with the defense and he was yelling at the Celtics coach, at the time, like, you can't do this, defense is not going to work that you're doing. And that's a 3-dimensional story about the game. A year earlier, and here's, you'll read about a game the Celtics won in Los Angeles the year before. Antoine Walker had a big shot late, and it turned out to be a buzzer beater. Kobe Bryant came off a curl, knocked down a shot right at the buzzer that looked like it won it for the Lakers. And you can look up this game and see that the Celtics won. But what you don't know is that Kobe hit a shot, and long before we had official review, the officials went to the scorer's table and went through the video over and over again, trying to see different angles. Did Kobe get the shot off in time? And 2 seats to my left, Jack Nicholson was sitting there, and he got up and turned to the guy next to him and said, "Was it good or wasn't it? Who knows?" And so it wasn't good, and the Celtics win the game. And here's the point. The Celtics win the game. You look it up on Basketball Reference, whenever that was, 2002, and it'll say Celtics 101, Lakers 100. That's 2 dimensions. But the story I just told was 3 dimensions because that's what actually happened in 3 dimensions.
And it's funny you say that, because if I had just known the two-dimensional memory, so to speak, I wouldn't remember it. But now that you've told me that story, I'll remember it. It gave life to it. You know what I mean? In a way that only an authentic memory that was there, that experienced it in the moment, could. It's really cool.
You never know what you're gonna. I don't know if you guys watch Curb, but there's a famous early episode of Curb where Shaq, Larry David, trips Shaq, and he's injured and can't play or whatever. And it's a typical, very Larry David thing to happen. That happened at a game I was doing because it was a Minnesota game, like the year before, and like Larry David was just shooting this thing at courtside. You don't think it's gonna. You never know. I said when you get to the ballpark, you never know when something's gonna happen that's gonna live forever. It's like, oh yeah, that episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm. I was there when the show.
That's just like, my mind is blown just like hearing those couple of stories. And really quick, I want to throw it back because you mentioned them and we were just talking about buzzer beaters. The fact that your Ricky Davis buzzer beater from November 2005 made it into the final season of The Sopranos. That is such like, just like a fun little thing. Like I don't know, like that's just super cool to me. I'll give you a quick little story about myself. My father figure passed when I was 14, and his favorite show was The Sopranos. So, you know, it was just like, for me, that was such a cool little factoid that I found out about you. So,
well, watch. This is one of my skills is taking a story in real time, and obviously, I didn't know that about you. I would have no way of knowing that.
Right.
But now I can tell you that my father died when I was 14. And the last game we ever watched together, the last NBA game or NBA game that we had watched before that was Cedric Maxwell Climb on My Back. It was a game that we had watched together. And then years later, I remember telling the story of Jim McKay died right before game 2 of the finals in 2008. And my open that night was about Jim McKay, about telling stories about how you have to be able to take all these things and, you know, and tie them all together. And here I am. That was a memory I have watching that game with my dad. And there I was about to call an NBA. And now, like, look at what a big part of my life he has become.
Right.
And, you know, so it's funny how there seems to be, you know, I don't know if the universe is connected or anything mythical like that, but you can find, if you look for them, you can find the threads that sports provide us.
Absolutely. Now, before we kick off the episode, one thing I like to ask every guest that comes on is to just tell the listener something. It can be a story. It can be anything about you. It can be advice, anything that you want to say to the listeners.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the most appropriate, I wouldn't call it advice, but it seems that my job over the last couple of months has been to tell the vocal minority, if you're not enjoying this, one of the greatest NBA seasons ever played, here's something nobody wants to hear. If the Celtics win the championship, they are in the conversation as the greatest team of all time. And that includes, and by the way, people are going to be horrified about the 86 Celtics, just Celtic fans. The 08 Celtics and the 86 Celtics weren't this dominant during the regular season. Okay. Doesn't mean that they were better at this. You can't possibly compare across eras, but that is what's going to rankle people, right? You can't compare the 3-point era where everyone shoots. It's like, hey, Dante DiVincenzo is now the Knicks all-time leader in 3. Of course he is. And next year somebody else will be. And the year after that, somebody else will be. Of course you can't compare it. But it's funny how people view history and how they are so defensive about it. And this is an example of social media. I'm sidetracking, but Marcus Smart, when Marcus Smart passed Larry Bird on the Celtics all-time 3-point list, I tweeted it because it was a milestone. And there it is. Okay, Marcus Smart is now 4th on the Celtics all-time 3-point list, and he passed Larry Bird. Well, you know now the way there's going to be a small minority of people. How can you say he was a better shooter than Larry? Oh, First of
So
all,
disrespectful.
nobody said he was a. Don't read a statistical fact and insert. It used to be people would take your statistical fact and try to insert an opinion into it. Now what they try to do is insert the opposite opinion of theirs into it so that they can somehow argue with it.
Yeah.
And the beauty of this particular one was Larry Bird was he was the greatest shooter of all time, and Marcus Smart's a terrible three-point shooter. And if you look at the first 5 or 6 years, different era, different three-point era, Marcus Smart shot a higher percentage from three than Larry did.
Yeah.
Through their first 5, 6, 7 years in the NBA. Larry was great, late 80s and beyond. He was obviously a great three-point shooter, but the first 5 or 6 years he wasn't. And people just turn a blind eye to that. It's not possible. Larry made every three-point shot he ever took. Just go on YouTube to see.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's not what happened. But again, my advice is, if you're of the mindset every time the Celtics do something historic to say it doesn't matter unless they win the championship, I say, tell you what, why don't you meet us on May 5th when they lose a game in the second round, and you meet us there. Don't tread on this historic season, because, not to steal a line from Doc Rivers, who was in our hotel this morning in Atlanta, the Bucks and Celtics were in the same hotel in Atlanta this morning for about 12 hours because they're changing partners here with Atlanta and New Orleans over these couple of days. And as Doc famously said, this starting lineup has never lost a playoff series, whatever. This team has not lost a playoff game. They're going to, but they haven't yet. So instead of, I would say, try this on for size. If you're of the opinion, nothing matters unless they win the championship and this is going to go wrong, and Jason Tatum can't make a shot in the final second of a tie game in March when they're up by 11 games in the Eastern Conference. Try this one on for size. Instead of being afraid of what's about to happen, why not say, we've had the 4th or 5th greatest regular season in history. Why not puff your chest out and walk in with a little swagger into the playoffs? And the people, and I said this last night, I'm not one at all for hot take theater, but if you ask 100 people right now, which team from Florida are you most afraid of in the playoffs? 100 people are going to say Miami. Well, all 100 of you are wrong right now if you're watching the NBA. That Orlando is going to be a tougher out right now than Miami. And I get it. There's people, I said somebody compared Jimmy Butler to Beetlejuice, right? And I said, let me do this. Jimmy Butler, Jimmy Butler, Jimmy Butler. Because you can't be, as Max famously said years ago, scared, get a dog. Because there's no, you have to be excited about what's to come here and not in fear of it. If they lose, they lose. But don't quit hiding under, hiding your head under a pillow and expecting doom. And I recognize this is part of the issue of New England of the last 2 decades of 6 Super Bowls, 4 World Series, and an NBA title and a Stanley Cup. And I think the Bruins plays in a little bit too, and what happened last year, even though the Bruins they had a great regular season, but they've changed the way they give out points, like 3-point shooting with the overtime losses. And they had a great year. They played a really good team in the first round. That was a fluke that obviously went to the finals. Nobody talks about that. And they barely lost the 7th game. But if you're so desperately afraid, I'd put it to you this way. A team has to beat the Celtics 4 out of 7. And maybe that'll happen, but the Celtics haven't lost 4 out of any 7 games this year, and it hasn't been close. And as we talk today, I put this tweet out this morning. I said, I don't want to argue. I don't want to talk about it, but digest this for 1 second. The Celtics are 20-4 in their last 24 games. In that span, they've won 15 of those games by 10 or more. They've lost the 4 games by 10 points combined. So, and then people go, well, that just means they're not good in the clutch. They are good in the clutch. They're the best fourth quarter team in the NBA, and that net rating actually goes up in the clutch. Well, I just feel like I heard on talk radio that they were saying Jason Tatum can't make a shot. Okay.
Yeah.
I get it. And if it strikes me that if you're looking this hard for something to be negative about, when the Celtics are lapping the field right now, you will never, ever be pleased by anything. And there is a segment of population 3 months from now when we're all in a duck boat. Somebody out there is going to go, yeah, well, it took them 7 games, though, to win it.
Yup.
Okay.
That's just very Boston of everybody.
But it's not. It's very Boston maybe right now. But remember, I say this a lot. I've said this in many different forums, but again, you got to repeat yourself because everyone's sampling you in different ways. When I came back in 2002, that team went to the conference finals. And people in Boston wanted to have a parade because it was Loserville here. Nobody had won. There's no Red Sox winning the World Series. It's incomprehensible. No one can think about that. Patriots winning a Super Bowl, not possible. They wanted to have a parade for a Celtics team that went to the conference finals and lost. In fact, it was such Loserville. Boston had had a parade 2 years earlier for a player that won a championship in another city. Ray Bork won the Stanley Cup in Denver, and they had a big event for him because people felt like that's as close as we're going to get to winning a championship. Now, just compare and contrast. If the Celtics lose in the conference finals this year, people are going to throw themselves off the Tobin Bridge.
Yep.
But those are the standards. And it's tough to enjoy yourself if the only thing that's going to do it for you is 70 wins and sweeping all these series. I've heard the talking heads have already started. Well, now the Celtics not only have to get to the finals, it should be an easy road.
Yeah, exactly. Now the bar has been raised. We're goal posting at this point. Yep.
How hard is it to win playoff games, win playoff series?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I'm glad that your life is so perfect that you can hold everyone else to those. Glad your kids get A+ and everything, and you've got a dream job, and everything you do is perfect. But
never have a bad day.
There's much more losing and winning than life. So when you have a season like this, you need to enjoy every second of it. And if they lose, they lose. But are you going to be sorry you didn't enjoy the 64 wins and the plus 11 scoring differential and the NBA record? They're certainly going to win one of these games here by 25 or whatever it is to set the NBA record for doing that. It's one of the greatest seasons of all time. And if they lose, why did they lose? Do they just play horribly and they get beat, or does somebody get hurt? Do a couple of guys get hurt? And here's my point about you have to be lucky and good. There is no kid in Toronto right now, none, that wakes up and looks at the championship pennant on his wall from 2019 and says, yeah, that looks good. But, Durant got hurt and Klay Thompson got hurt in the final. So I'm not sure. And, Kawhi's shot, that could easily have bounced out. I'm not really comfortable with that championship and that pennant hanging in my room. That's not how it works. You got to be lucky and good. No one's going to remember the other stuff.
Yeah, and it's like that concept of the good old days, except we're living them right now. Like these are the good old days. They're happening right now. Everybody look around and remember this moment, because in 10 years, you'll look back on this and be like, wow, that was the best time I've ever had. I love basketball.
When Al and Derek White and Drew Holiday, when they walk back into the building in 15 years, come on. So try to be a little more present in the present, I guess, and enjoy what you're seeing. Look at the standings every day, because the Celtics could win championships. They'll never be 11 games up in the Eastern Conference again. This just doesn't happen. I'm pretty sure as we're talking, I think Denver lost that game tonight. So you realize as we're talking, 15 days after the Celtics clinched the playoff spot, nobody else in the NBA has clinched. That's the degree to which they are lapping the field. 15 days later, nobody else has even clinched the playoff spot.
It makes me so happy.
I mean, and that's the point. Be happy today. Maybe something will go wrong in the playoffs, and maybe it won't. But that's not taking. They have not lost a playoff game yet.
And there's nothing we can do about it.
That's right.
Yeah, no.
We're all excited for the playoffs, but don't dismiss the only problem with these last 9 games is that clearly when there's nothing to play for, that record, this is a true story. I was very aware. Now, it's been done by the Warriors 2 or 3 times. The Spurs did it, this double-digit scoring differential. When the Celtics did it in 2008, it had only been done 4 or 5 times in history, and it hadn't been done outside of the Jordan Bulls. Nobody had done it in like 30 years when the Celtics, 35 years, when the Celtics did it in 2008. Now, the last night of the season, they had like a 10.08. I remember going into the last game knowing that it's possible they won't get this thing. And I'm the only one who cares. But I knew that years later, you want to see them on that list. And what a shame it would be if it was 9.97. And if you could look this game up, I don't have to because I remember it. They were behind by 12, 13 points to the Nets in this meaningless game at the end of the season. But I remember at halftime they're going to blow this thing. And they're going to end up at 9.98. I'm the only one that's going to care, but it's going to look stupid for forever when they have a chance to make this history. And they came back and they won the game, and they got the double-digit scoring differential. But you knew you were seeing something special as that entire season was going on, and so you just want to document it, and hopefully we have.
I like the way you said it. To kind of all wrap that together, just be present in the present. I do like that a lot. And again, we talked about that at the beginning of this. And like I mentioned, Ryan and I have been talking about this with other people, is just enjoy the ride. And I've used that argument that you used of this team hasn't played together yet in the playoffs. Like, we don't know what's going to happen. And like, obviously we can hope and pray and look at the numbers and assume they're going to be great. But to your point, like, they haven't played a game together. And I'm very much on the same page. And subconsciously, I think just, at night when I'm on Twitter or whatever, and I see the factoids that you're posting, and I'm kind of seeing the more look at it objectively rather than in a narrow lens type of stuff. I think that's subconsciously like kind of changing my viewpoint. Because I was never like a negative about the team. It was never like, oh, this is a bad loss, they're not good in the clutch. But I definitely think I've come around to more like, hey, just breathe type of mentality. But the last question I have for you, and this is something we also ask everybody, being on Dunks and Donuts, what is your favorite type of donut?
Bring me back to my donut days, which have long since I had too many donut days when I was younger. Which is I try to train my kid, like, don't grow up to be an adult who has to go run 5-6 miles a day because you were so heavy when you were a kid. Ironically, I would say when I was a kid, that without having any idea what my future was going to have for me, I was a Boston cream person. And I didn't have the same. So now there's all these awesome donuts. There's a place in Portland, Voodoo Donuts, where we go. There's all these different places all over that you have to work very hard to avoid because it makes running all the miles go away pretty quickly. But that's probably my answer. I mean, I was a pretty big Dunkin' Donuts guy. I had another great Cedric Maxwell story. I went down to see him in Charlotte one summer, one off season, and he literally almost wrecked the car because the hot light was on at Krispy Kreme. They had just put it on. So the hot ones had just come out, and he swerved across
Important
2 lanes of traffic, and then there's just like these 2 dudes just sitting there in a car eating like hot, without a care in the world.
I love that. That's a great Cedric story. So that's great. Well, Mr. Grande, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat with Ryan and I to tell us your story. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Yes, thank you so much.
You guys are the reason we do what we do. It's people that care about the Celtics and care about us. We are, to some degree, performers without an audience, and we know you're all out there, but we can't see you, and we can't, we hear from you sometimes, and that's the benefit, the upside of social media. But that's why we do what we do. Come say hi at the Garden. When people do that, we appreciate it. We're here, as I said, we do this every night, and this is the reason why.
Well, again, I do want to say thank you. And with that, everybody, that concludes this very special episode of Dunks and Donuts. That was the legendary Sean Grande. I mean, like Ryan said before his interview, this guy is exceptionally smart. And I was just like completely blown away the whole time.
I know. I was nervous, but I think we played it off well. I'm
so
glad that he was willing to spend that much time with us and go through so many of his memories and how he breaks everything down. Is just super interesting. And now we know him, which is so cool.
Yeah, it's what's crazy too is like the whole thing where I told him about my father figure, and then like he had a very nearly identical situation with
Yeah.
his father figure. Like, to me, that was just like, holy crap. Like,
It was such an interesting moment too, because the way he led into it was like right at the beginning, and I could tell that the way he was going to respond to that would kind of define the way our conversation went. You know what I mean? Not in a good way or a bad way, but he then provided like the most possible vulnerable answer to what you said, that it was like, oh wow, he didn't have to tell us all that. You know what I mean?
Right.
But he did, which was so cool.
No, it was awesome.
Heck yes.
But yeah, so again, that was Mr. Sean Grande. So for all of the Dunks and Donuts listeners, obviously Ryan and I will be back next week for the pet episode.
Yay!
We were going to do it. We forgot that the holiday was this past Sunday, so we were like, let's take a breather. You know, yeah. So this coming weekend we'll have the pet episode, and then we have another special interview coming out next week, and we will keep that on the DL for now. So until then, grab your donuts, grab your coffee, and we will be back.
Bye.